are going to discuss about the topic of the sampling. Our subject is communication and research methods. In research terms, a sample is a group of people, objects, or items that are taken from a large population or measurements. The sample should be representative of the population to ensure that we can generalize the findings from the research sample to the population as a whole. Basically, sampling is the process or set of data that a researcher chooses or selects from a large population by using a predefined selection method. These elements are known as sample points, sampling units, or observation. Sampling is the process of selecting observations to provide an adequate description and inference of the people. In most cases, it is impossible or costly and time-consuming to research the whole population. Hence, examining the sample provides insight that the researcher can apply to the entire population. Sample, it is a unit that is selected from population, represents the whole population. Purpose to draw the inference. Typically, the population for market research is enormous. Marketing and enumeration of the whole population is practically impossible. The sample usually represents a manageable size from this population. Researchers then collect data from these samples in the form of surveys, polls, and questionnaires and extrapolates this data analysis to the broader community. So this is about the sampling. Sampling basically in this where we can select a particular sampling from the units. What you want to take about what you actually observe in the data. Sampling is a process used in statistical analysis in which a predetermined number of observations are taken from a larger population. The methodology used to sample from a larger population depends upon the type of analysis being performed, but it may include simple random sampling or systematic sampling. Sampling is also the selection of a subset of the population of interest in the research study. Population is homogeneous. In this, the term is used in statistical in its ordinary sense, but most frequently occurs in connection with sample from different populations, which may or may not be identical. If the populations are identical, they are said to be homogeneous. And by extension, the sample data are also said to be homogeneous. Basically, these kind of sample selecting a small homogeneous group of subjects or unit for examination and analysis. Homogeneous sampling is used when the goal of the research is to understand and describe a particular group in depth. Now, in the population is heterogeneous. Population is heterogeneous in also a statistics means that your population samples or results are different. It is the opposite of homogeneity, which means that the population data results are the same. A heterogeneous population or sample is one where every member has a different value for the characteristics you are interested in. If the population is heterogeneous with respect to the characteristic under study, then one such sampling procedure is stratified sampling. Subpopulations are termed as strata. Treat each subpopulation as separate population and draw a sample by SRS from each stratum. Now, this is the sampling design process. Firstly, we have to know about the population. Population typically refers is known as a large collection of individuals or objects that is the main focus of a scientific query. A research population is also known as a well-defined collection of individuals or objects known to have similar characteristics. A population is a complete set of people with a specialized set of characteristics, and a sample is a subset of population. The usual criteria we use in defining population are group. Example, the population of Uttar Pradesh. Now, determining sampling frame. In this, the frame is organized in a local, logical, systematic fashion. The frame has additional information about the units that allow the use of more advanced sampling frame. Every element of the population of interest is present in the frame. Every element of the population is present only once in the frame. Now, the sampling procedure. Sampling procedure, there are several approaches to determining the sample size. These include using a census for small population, eliminating a sample size of similar studies using published tables, and applying formulas to calculate a sample size. Sample size determination is also the technique of election the number of observations to include in a sample. The sample size is an important feature of any study or investigation in which the aim is to make inferences about the population from a sample. Next, we have some of the probability sample. In this, we have a simple random sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, systematic sampling, and multi-stage sampling. And in the other hand, we have a non-probability sampling. In this, convenient, judgmental, quota, and snowball sampling. Firstly, we will talk about the simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is basically a subset of individuals choose from a large set in which a subset of individuals are chosen randomly, all with the same probability. Each subset of individual has the same probability of being chosen from the sample. Basically, a simple random sampling is a subset of also a statistical population in which meant to be an unbiased representation of a group. In this, researchers generate a simple random sample by obtaining an executive list of a large population and then selecting at random a certain number of individuals to comprise the sample. Their advantage is this: easy to analysis data, minimal knowledge of population needed, and disadvantages is this: low frequency of use, doesn't use researchers' expertise, and large risk of random error. So you can see the diagram here of the simple random sampling. All subsets of the frame are given an equal probability, but we have to random number generate like that. Next is a cluster sampling. Cluster sampling basically that kind of sampling in which used when mutually homogeneous yet internally heterogeneous grouping are evident in a statistical population. It is often used in marketing research. In this sampling plan, the total population is divided into these groups, and a simple random sample of the group is selected. The elements in each cluster are then sampled. If all elements in each sampled cluster are sampled, then this is referred to as a one-stage cluster sampling plan. For a fixed sample size, the expected random error is smaller when most of the variation in the population is present internally within the groups and not between the groups. So you can see the diagram here, how we can choose the cluster sampling from the sections. A cluster sampling, researchers divided a population into smaller groups known as cluster. They then randomly selected among these clusters from a sample. Cluster sampling is a method of probability sampling that is often used to study a large population. Its advantages: can estimate characteristics of both cluster and population. And disadvantages is this: the cost to reach an element of sample is very high, and each stage in clustered sampling introduces the sampling error. Now is the systematic random sampling. Systematic random sampling is this, where we will choose the type of probability sampling method in which sample members from a larger population are selected according to a random starting point, but with a fixed periodic intervals. This interval, called the sampling interval, is calculated by dividing the population size by the desired sample size. Order all units in the sampling frame. Then every number on the list is selected like n sampling intervals. Systematic sampling is a statistical method involving the selection of elements from an ordered sampling frame. The most common form of systematic sampling is an equiprobability method. In this, despite the sample population being selected in advance, systematic sampling is still thought of as being random if the periodic interval is determined beforehand and the starting point is random. Like, systematic sampling is a probability sampling method in which a random sampling is fixed. Advantages is this: moderate cost, moderate usage, simple to draw sample, easy to verify, and disadvantages is this: periodic ordering required. So non-probability sample is this branch of sample selection that uses non-random way to select a group of people to practice in research. Basically, units of the sample are chosen on the basis of personal judgment or convenience. There are no statistical techniques for measuring random sampling error in a non-probability sample. In this, we have to convince the sampling, quota sampling, judgmental sampling, snowball sampling, and self-selection sampling. A convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is this, where we can convince a decentralized sampling or opportunity sampling is also a type of non-probability sampling that involves the sample being drawn from that part of the population that is close to hand. This type of sampling is most useful for pilot study. Convenience sampling involves using respondents who are convenient to the researcher. There is no pattern whatever in acquiring these respondents. They may be required merely asking people who are present in the street. Advantages is this very low cost, extensively used, and disadvantages is this variability and bias can't be measured and controlled. Now next is the quota sampling. Quota sampling basically that kind of sampling method in which researchers create a sample involving individuals that represent a population. They decide and create quotas so that the market research samples can be useful in collecting data. Like used when researcher budget is limited, very extensively used, and disadvantages is this time consuming, projecting data beyond sample not justified. Judgmental sampling. Judgmental sampling basically that kind of sampling where we can't judge anyone for sample anywhere. In this kind of sampling, we can choose or select anywhere. Or expert sample is a type of non-random sampling that is selected based on the opinion of an expert. Ethical hacking is a skill which has been recently attacking youth. More and more people are selecting it is a profession. Advantage is this, there is a occurrence of quality response and meet the specific object. Disadvantages is this, bias selection of sample may occur and time consuming process. So this called the sampling error. Sampling error basically include when the statistical characteristics of a population are estimated from a subset or sample of that population. Since the sample doesn't include all members of the population, statistics of the sample, such as means and quartiles, generally differ from the statistics of the entire population. The difference between the sample statistics and population parameter is considered the sampling error. Since sampling is almost always done to estimate population parameter that are unknown, by definition, exact measurement of the sampling error will not be possible. However, they can often be estimated either by journal method such as bootstrapping. Now we have a methods of reducing sampling error like specific problem selection, systematic documentation of related research, effectively enumeration, effective pre-testing, controlling method bias, and selection of appropriate sampling techniques. So thank you so much. I hope you clear all the context of the sampling and research types and types of sampling. So thank you so much.